Hello, welcome to Idaho Listens. My name is Isaac Castellano. I'm the Associate Director of the Institute for Advancing American Values, and I will be your host this evening. Almost like we're on a cruise ship, but better. We're in Lewiston. So I'll give a little context for Idaho Listens, because I imagine not everyone knows or has watched the videos or has the background of this program. And then I'm going to invite Lewis and Clark State College Provost Chilson up to make a few remarks. Then you'll see me one more time to talk about logistics. And it sounds complicated, but it isn't, and I'll explain all of that in a minute. So the backstory here with Idaho Listens is that several years ago at Boise State, we had a very thoughtful philanthropist, Greg Carr, approached the university with concern about the state of civility in America, the kind of tone that we were having in our political discussions. And we don't need to dive into a long history of partisanship. You all have been living through the last few years, so you know what I'm talking about. But the interesting, or shall we say, poignant part of it was, what are we going to do about it? What is to be done about the lack of civility, about partisanship, the lack of dialogue across difference, our social media bubbles, all of that? What can we do? And so between Greg Carr, our past president, I'm just going to move this back just. Can you still hear me in the back if I don't eat the mic? Our past president, President Marlene Tromp, and then Andrew Finstuen, who is the director of the Institute, and he is very apologetic that he's not here this evening, came up with this notion of starting a conversation about values, pulling together a group of speakers, a group of community members, not your typical folks, not your presidents, not your city council members, no offense to any of the politicians here, but regular people who had something to say, something to share, a value to share. Because when we start these conversations across difference, if we start on policy, like, what do you think about some hot button issue? We just immediately put up our defenses. We immediately decide if the person sitting across from us is someone we can actually have a conversation with. And oftentimes, when it's opposite positions, the conversation's over. We stop. We don't go any further. And that's the end of any kind of listening. That's the end of any kind of real sharing. But if we start with values and we talk about what is at our core, that's a lot different, because a lot of us, despite being different, have a lot of the same values. And so having and starting a conversation with values just is almost like just a starting point, an opening up to have real dialogue, real conversation. And so this is where this program came from. We are in Lewiston tonight. We have been in Coeur d'Alene and Salmon and Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, in Boise, in Caldwell. We were out in Michigan last November. Late this summer, in September, we're going to be in the nation's capital doing what we're calling America Listens, pulling speakers from across the United States, including one of our speakers from Idaho, to bring this to a national audience. And we have several other schools interested as well. President Tromp moved on to the University of Vermont. She's going to recreate the program there. There's a school in Oklahoma. So we're really trying to share out this model. And I think at the end of tonight, you'll have a much better sense of what it feels like. And not to say that you haven't had a listening experience before, we all have, obviously. But the model itself, I think, is a little bit different. In part because the big request to all of you is to remain silent during the entirety of the program. So when I come back, I'll just review this. But we'll have a big round of applause for all of our speakers. I'll call that first speaker up, and then each of the speakers will speak without us making any noise, maybe a tear or a laugh, but no applause, with the idea that you, the audience will sit here silently and just think and absorb what is being shared with you. And so you think you're here to listen, you are, but you are also part of the program. You are, as they say about the internet, you are the product. In so much as you will be experiencing just that listening piece of it. The other thing I want to share with you is that we have worked to bring together a group of diverse speakers, so people who have different backgrounds, different ages, different experiences. It is not a perfect mirror of the Lewis and Clark Valley, so keep that in mind. But this was the attempt, and so when we go to other communities, this is essentially what we try to do, is to bring out where are the different corners and pockets of that community. We have a wonderful speaker coach. Her name is Nancy Buffington. She's sitting right here in the center of the room. She works with each of the speakers, both in group and one-on-one, to help them bring out what they want to say. We do not edit. We do not ask them to say certain things. There's no censorship. There's nothing like that. Nancy's role is to help, particularly folks who don't have a lot of background in public speaking, to bring out their story, bring out their value. And that's an important part to know about the overarching program. So with that, I have a long list of thank yous of folks who I want to acknowledge who are part of making this evening possible. Of course, Greg Carr and his support of this program. This is indispensable for us. Heather Calkins, who is in the back room, she has done she's the University Special Events Coordinator, and her team have helped pull all of this together. I say help, they've really pulled all of it together. Sherry Lyons and Charlotte and her team here at the hotel, Torn and Priscilla, who are filming this, Alan, Kaylee, Logan, Ty, and Trish, who are Institute for Advancing American Values Fellows, who have made this possible. Happy Day Catering, who is feeding us later, and Hannah, who is our coordinator. A very special thank you to Peggy Hoisingfeld, and I hope I got that right. Peggy, where are you at? In the back. Peggy came to our Coeur d'Alene event 2 years ago and said, I'd like to see this in Lewiston. So without Peggy's work, we would not be here this evening. I want to thank our speakers and their families. I know public speaking is a little nerve-wracking, and so thank you for being here. Mayor Johnson, Mark Losh, Senator McCain, Kristen Kenmack, Victoria Scalise, Heidi Andrews, and everybody else who helped spread the word about this evening's event. Of course, a huge thank you to Nancy Buffington, who was our secret sauce for this event. And then, of course, all of you for participating. And then a real big special thank you to LC State, particularly President Pemberton and Provost Chilson, their staff, Logan Fowler, who was indispensable for making this evening possible. So a huge round of thank you to all of those folks for tonight. And I forgot Amy Lintz and Rebecca Miles also were very important for this. So now please welcome Provost Chilson to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Castellano. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Fred Chilson, and I serve as the Provost and Vice President at Lewis Clark State College. And on behalf of LC State, I welcome you to this event, as well as extend a warm welcome to our friends from Boise State University for making the trip to Lewiston and sponsoring this event. Founded in 1893, LC State has a long and storied history of serving students and Idaho. Over our 133 years, we've taken pride in partnering with all of our sister institutions, including our four-year institution sisters, Idaho State University, the University of Idaho, and Boise State University. These partnerships have been the product of dialogue, and the results have been more and better opportunities for all Idahoans. While all of Idaho's higher education institutions have unique missions, programs, and roles, we're brought together by the common goal of seeing Idaho thrive. Robust dialogue, the sharing of ideas, and the vibrant partnerships throughout and across our state are the vital to the success of our schools, businesses, and communities. With that, I thank you for being here and for being part of tonight's dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, please silence your cell phones. Like, just turn them off. Just turn them off, put them away. This is, again, I'll just repeat myself a little bit. This is an opportunity to listen. So as the pilot says, and I hate it when they say this because I hate flying, and the plane, they're like, sit back and relax the flight, and enjoy the flight, relax. As someone who doesn't like to fly, I don't like waiting for the wheels to touch down on the ground. But do, in fact, sit back, relax, be present, listen to our speakers here. And again, no applause for the individual speakers, and we'll do a huge round of applause at the very end. We'll have our 4 speakers, our Idaho Listens 1, and then about a 7-minute break, use the bathroom, grab some water, what have you, and then we'll resume with our second set of speakers. And then afterward, we'll all break bread together. So with that, let's give out a huge round of applause for everyone speaking tonight. And now I'd like to welcome Cindy O'Brien to the microphone.
The morning I was called out of math class in 7th grade, I had no idea how dramatically my life was about to change. The normally bubbly and friendly school secretary greeted me with a somber tone. When she said my mother was coming to pick me up and gave no further explanation, I knew it wouldn't be good. When Mom arrived, her tear-stained face sent alarms through my body. My mother was always stoic. I had never seen her cry. That was the day I learned that the only father I had known had died by suicide. That moment was just one of a piece of a childhood shaped by instability, addiction, and loss. I was the youngest of 5 children raised in remote, rural Idaho. My mother was partnered with several alcoholics throughout my youth. We lived below the poverty threshold, at times without electricity, running water, and indoor plumbing. It definitely wasn't what anyone would characterize as an easy life, and tragedy seemed to arrive far too often. Just before my dad's suicide, my brother was brain injured and permanently disabled in a car accident. 2 years later, my oldest sister suffered the same fate in a motorcycle crash that killed her boyfriend. Less than a year after that, my grandparents, our only real anchors as children, were killed by a truck driver high on amphetamines. If you looked at my life on paper up to that point, you might conclude that I was statistically destined for more of the same. My husband's childhood wasn't much different. He was the second youngest of 12 children in a family marked by violence, uncertainty, and substance abuse. We met in high school. I was 14, he was 17. Perhaps we were drawn to each other by our common denominator of dysfunction, seemingly increasing odds that the cycles would be repeated. Several of our siblings struggled with addiction and lived lives that mirrored our childhoods, but somehow we both knew we wanted something different. Together, we were determined to shape a new family legacy for ourselves, but most of all, for our children. Now, you might think I'm planning to expound on the virtues of working hard, making good choices, bootstraps, all that stuff. For a time, I really believed that's all there was to it. But that's actually not where I'm going with this at all. In fact, when I really step back and look at it, I believe the most important elements of my husband's and my success in building a different lifestyle were the unearned advantages we both had, and frankly, some dumb luck. That realization came slowly, beginning in my first psychology classes in college with the wonderful psych professors at LCSC, who didn't just pour information into my brain, but stimulated and inspired critical thought, helping me to understand the why behind human behavior. For someone whose childhood felt chaotic, unpredictable, and often out of control, that understanding was everything. It brought a kind of peace and also sparked a desire to change outcomes. As I studied genetics, brain chemistry, and the physiological basis of mental illness and addiction, something else happened. I started to lose my sanctimony, a pretty good trait in retrospect. I began asking myself questions I had never considered. What if the difference between my siblings and me wasn't just effort? What if it wasn't just better choices? What if I had simply won parts of a genetic lottery or dodged a few bullets in what feels like DNA Russian roulette? Beyond that, I recognized the other advantages that had quietly shown up in my life. Friends' parents who welcomed me into stable homes when my world was askew. One friend's mother who told me I would go to college, it was not a matter of if, instilling confidence I didn't know I needed. Neighbors who saw the need and found ways to let me earn money, paying more than I deserved. People who guided me to resources I didn't even know existed. The list is endless and impossible to enumerate. Slowly, I realized something uncomfortable but important. I did not fully own my success. I may have been an investor, but the primary shareholders were the people, circumstances, and opportunities I didn't earn. I share that to set the stage for what I've learned over the past 3 decades working with adults and children facing mental illness and addiction challenges. There are many effective treatments, and I absolutely believe in them. But far and away, in my experience, the most impactful factor in successful recovery, and one that can actually stand alone to make the difference, is support. If you really think about it, no one overcomes or accomplishes anything alone, not truly. Support can take many forms. It can be biological, the DNA we inherit or luckily didn't, emotional, spiritual, educational, financial, medical, even chemical, to balance what our body can't on its own. Access to that support can come from many places: family, friends, mentors, even strangers. Sometimes it's found in government programs or the work of compassionate charities, and often it's simply the result of sheer chance. I have heard countless stories of abuse, trauma, and circumstances so severe they're hard to comprehend. In small towns like ours, I won't share the details, but you don't need me to. You've seen them, you've heard them, some of you have probably lived them. I've also heard another kind of story. The invisible internal battles, the kind where just getting out of bed, making it through a day is an act of courage. And because there are no obvious impairments for people to see, those struggles are often met, not with compassion, but with expectation to function at levels that are impossible to meet. Sometimes the burden becomes too much. We see that in our suicide rates. In all my years of witnessing the darkest parts of what people endure, support is that primary essential ingredient that brings the light back in and can lift someone just enough to access the strength they already have inside. That just enough looks very different for everyone, which means this: none of us are truly qualified to decide what someone else needs or is entitled to in order to overcome. And yet, too often we do. Here's what I know for certain. If even one of the people who helped me along the way had decided I wasn't worth the effort, helping me didn't matter, my circumstances were my fault, that I hadn't earned or didn't deserve their help, my story could have ended very differently. When we choose compassion, when we choose to help and not to condemn or judge, when we offer generosity where we can, or give without expectation of anything in return, we may be changing the course of someone's life, and maybe, just maybe, the lives of all the generations that follow.
When I was a kid, I hated silence. I hated being alone, and I would make as many excuses as I could in order to not be alone, to not experience silence. At home, I would rarely choose to spend any time in my room. I would choose to do activities in places where my family would be around, even if that meant my mom was doing a YouTube Zumba class or my dad was watching TV. Even with my friends, no matter how tired or drained I was, I would make excuses to stay in order to avoid that daunting silence of being alone. And that was the case for a lot of things. When I would talk to strangers, new people, I was extremely shy. But even with being shy, I would want to fill as much space as possible. Make sure there wasn't a single dull moment or anything like that, because I hated silence. My first exposure to music was in middle school. They made us all choose some sort of music, whether it be choir, band, or orchestra. I chose orchestra, and I chose viola to be my instrument. I found it to be a lot of fun. I loved the instrument. I liked being part of the group, and of course, I loved making music. And in terms of silence, it was all pretty much the same. I would surround myself with other people as much as I could, hung out with people that I didn't even always get along with, just so that I wouldn't have to be in that silence. We're going to step forward again to high school. I kept doing music. I kept playing viola, and I had this fantastic music teacher, Dr. Andrew Peck, and he said something that I still remember today. He said that art decorates space, and music decorates time. And in another class, he shared this quote from someone I can't remember really well at this point, but essentially what it said is that the magic of music happens at the end of a piece when it's completed. The silence right before the audience applauds or reacts, that's where music happens. Now, I didn't completely understand that. It sounded really cool, it sounded very deep, but I didn't completely understand it until about a year later. We were performing, and I still remember the pieces. We played a piece by William Hofelt called In the Company of Angels, and Adagietto from Gustav Mahler's Symphony No. 5. And they're not interesting pieces for high schoolers. We really liked these fast-paced, super dynamic, and loud pieces, but these two were nearly the opposite. There was so much silence, so much tension, and it was so slow. But when we played those pieces, I started to see, or I suppose I started to notice the beauty of those silences. We finished those pieces, and as the last notes rung out, I got goosebumps. There was genuinely something magical about that silence. And as I started to understand that silence more, I felt like I started to understand it a little bit more in my life. With my friends, I started to notice that maybe it's okay to be a little bit quieter. I wouldn't say it was perfectly comfortable yet, but the concept kind of floated in my head from then on. We'll fast forward another year, and my girlfriend and I had just started a little symphony orchestra for our school. I had the opportunity to conduct that symphony, and at our first performance ever, our first piece went wrong. We had to stop the piece completely, regain our composure, and start again, all in front of a full audience. And there was a lot of tension, an eerie type of silence. But after that, we played it, we finished the piece, and just like I'd learned, there was a silence before the audience reacted. And I looked at the players, their faces. They all spoke a different story. Some faces spoke of disappointment, some of happiness, nervousness, and some looking as if to ask me, what did I think? But the silences we experienced together as a group through the music brought me an unbelievable pride. The peace was imperfect. The silence was imperfect. But we were all connected through that silence to each other, to the music, to the audience, imperfections and all. Some months pass, and it's May of my senior year. Our last performance was coming up. Because of my experience with our little symphony, I was given the opportunity to conduct for everyone, all of the band, all of the choir, all of the orchestra. And we were going to play Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. There were a lot of emotions that day and in that performance. A lot of people were sad that it was ending. Some people were happy and excited just to be playing the piece. And a lot were somewhere in between. And in that moment, as we played and performed, I could have been deaf. All the emotions would have still been as powerful, as magical, as beautiful. Someone recently asked me, what was the performance like? Was it perfect? Did it sound amazing? And my genuine response to that was, I can't remember. Because what I remember from that moment wasn't the notes or the music, it was the silence, where everyone was feeling so strongly and so genuinely connected to each other. That's what I remember. And that's what I value and hold so dearly. I think that started to reflect in my life. I realized that silence is okay, that I should surround myself with people that I really want to be with. And I found those people. I found 2 or 3 best friends that I still consider to be really, really close with today. And we can just not talk about anything. We can just be in the same space and be comfortable. After all of it, you'd think that I've mastered silence, that I'm comfortable being alone now, but that's not the case. There are times that I'm still not comfortable being alone with my silence. But because of music and because of my friends and the silence that I've experienced with them, I have a much better understanding of how I value silence as I strive to find peace with it. Silence to me means genuine connection. Genuine connection with music, genuine connection with the people I love. So I suppose that getting comfortable with silence alone is to be genuinely connected to me.
There are many people who have touched my life, who have helped to shape and form who I am today. And first of all, it was my parents. I'm the oldest of 10 and grew up in Grangeville, Idaho. Our parents taught us what it means to serve, to reach out, to be present to others with compassion and an understanding heart. They never were too busy to help anyone. While my mother was raising 10 children, she was also a 4-H leader for 25 years. She was eager to help young boys and girls learn life skills. When my younger brother and I were in the 5th and 7th graders, we helped clean St. Peter and Paul's School. 4 classrooms, a gym, a kitchen, a bathroom. I'm not sure how clean we really got it. But during the summer, my mother would come and wash all the walls in the school, strip, wax, and buff all the floors. She did this without pay because that's just what she did. My mother gave of herself selflessly. If someone or something needed something done, she was there. My dad was a mechanic who worked on farm equipment, particularly balers and combines. He generously responded to calls when someone's equipment needed to be repaired. It didn't matter if it was after work hours, early in the morning, late at night. I saw his concern on his face when he talked to the farmer when they needed their equipment repaired because harvesting needed to be done. As I watched my parents, I learned at an early age what it means to serve with an understanding heart and compassion. For 18 years, I worked at St. Jude's Church in Redmond, Washington, a city well known for its technology. The parish was relatively affluent, so it was important for me that parishioners had their feet in two worlds. In the world in which most of them lived, a world of affluence, and a world that could become invisible if one chose to close their eyes. A world where those who were homeless lived. A world where those living with mental illness needed a safe place. At that time, various cities were asking parishes to welcome and to journey with those who were homeless. They would stay at the church for 3 months and then move on to the next church. The first time we did this, we had 100 tents on our church lawn. It would have been so easy to make an excuse to not be welcoming or simply ignore those living on the margins of society. However, my parents' words haunted me. You are never too busy to help others. All they need is an understanding heart and a compassionate presence. Through my experience, I learned that when someone is struggling to survive, many times all they need is someone to listen to them. Once you hear their story, you move beyond judgment to compassion. Many of the residents simply needed to know that someone cared about them and would treat them with respect. 9 years ago, I started a safe parking program at St. Jude's Church. The focus of the program was to welcome those living in their cars with a safe place to live, a safe place to sleep, as well as connecting them with the resources that they needed. I'd like to say that this was something easy to do. It wasn't. I remember those cold, rainy, wintry Seattle nights when I would be lying in my warm, comfortable bed, remembering the 15 people who were sleeping in their cars. Or those very hot summer evenings when I was living in air conditioning. I remember Kathy, 74 years old, white woman, very frail, living in her car, while her daughter lived only a few miles away in a nice home. Children whose parents were successful business owners living in their car. I remember Patrick, who drove from New York to Seattle with the intent of taking his own life. He lived with mental illness that his parents would not accept. He wanted to be as far away from his family as he could. For days and weeks, he stayed in his car. Depression had occupied every fiber of his being. The residents of the Safe Parking Program began to offer their support. They would stop by his car and try to encourage him by talking through the window. With their encouragement and additional resources, he began to leave his car for short periods of time. Over time, Patrick was finally able to once again re-enter into life. He now lives in his own apartment and is doing well. Living with compassion and an understanding heart also comes with challenges. At times, I had to be honest with the residents and ask them to leave, especially if their behavior was disruptive to the group or if they were drinking or using drugs. I was trying to maintain a delicate balance between being supportive to each individual person while at the same time being aware of the common good of the whole group. My heart would always be heavy when I needed to ask someone to leave because I didn't know where they were going. Options were very limited. Would they find themselves in the Fred Meyer, Home Depot parking lots, parking on the side of the streets, only for the police to come to tell them to move on? There would be times when I would find myself walking down the hall of the parish office saying, "God, it isn't easy working with the poor." And then I would say, "And yes, they add so much to my life." I learned what it means to support one another as I watched them gather in the parking lot night after night for an AA meeting, or patiently reaching out to someone who was struggling with life or relationship issues, or trying to be successful at work, or when they would pool their resources to fix a common meal for everyone. I learned that a house has many meanings. For some, the tent is their house. For others, it's a car. When we reach out in service to others, in compassion and with an understanding heart, our world is filled with color and music and joy. We see smiles on the faces of one another and know that, yes, together, we can make it another day. We can make a difference in the lives of others when we respond with compassion and an understanding heart.
I'm John Mantrek, a retired physician, a diagnostic radiologist who practiced nearly my entire career here in the Lewis-Clark Valley. Many of you are familiar with my more famous father, William Mantrek, who was a civic leader and the region's first pediatrician who also had a second career in allergy and immunology. He passed away nearly 3 years ago at age 98. I was asked to address my values. As cliche as it sounds for physicians, I deeply value the sanctity of human life. This is manifest through intense efforts and desire to save lives and also ameliorate pain and suffering associated with disease. My dad was a pediatrician arriving in Lewis-Clark Valley in the early 1950s. Those were the days before advanced diagnostic testing, minimally invasive procedures, and the wide variety of medications that we utilize today. The nuns fully administered the Catholic hospital, and many were also nurses. I remember Sister Helen Francis, the CEO of St. Joseph, would walk around late at night in full habit and offer tea and snacks and comfort to the working nurses and doctors. To a small child, she looked both majestic and somewhat austere. I actually thought she was God, I think, through the eyes of a small child. What the staff really had to offer in those days was themselves, their kindness, compassion, and comfort to those who were very sick and often transitioning to heaven. Many nights, Dad would sit by the bassinet of a sick newborn all night long, tending to their every need, medications, fluids, and temperature, and basically willing the child back to life. This was after he had worked a 12-hour day, and he was going to work a 12-hour day the following day, not to mention hospital rounds and meetings. One grandparent of a child, he say, witnessed this scene and wrote a letter to the Tribune stating he did believe this physician would substitute his life for that child if given a choice. And I asked my father that, and he said, yes, I would have done that, taken that choice. So these observations were tremendously impactful to me as a child, young child, but I don't know how much of my present attitude was genetically bequeathed or environmentally influenced. Dad used to tell my sister Molly, who's a retired ophthalmologist in the Boise area, the patients will not really care what you know until they know that you actually care about them. As an internal medicine intern in Seattle in the late 1980s, unfortunately, my attitude deteriorated. It was a very difficult year with 100-hour work weeks, including 40-hour stints in a row of working. That would be two work days and a call night where I maybe get a couple of hours of sleep. My relatively small internship class of 30 had already suffered 2 suicide attempts. I was complaining a lot, bemoaning my lack of sleep and life in general. Unfortunately, this attitude was apparent in my suffering performance, as noted by my attending physicians who were supervising me. At this point, I confided in my sister, Molly, who was a senior resident at Stanford at the time, in a very emotional phone call. I tearfully confessed, "Molly, I'm exhausted. I'm just completely spent. I'm working basically every waking hour and even most sleep hours. I'm at the end of my rope, and my performance is declining. I generally feel lost, and I'm even questioning whether medicine is the proper career path for me." She assured me this is a very difficult process for everyone, and the secret to her stellar success was transposing in her mind's eye our family members onto her patients. Just pretend that the patient lying in the bed is mom or dad, and that you would do anything in the world to relieve their pain and save them. Please try to remember that this particular patient is someone's mother or aunt or sister or cousin, and they deserve your very, very best effort. Rearmed with a new attitude, my intern performance improved dramatically overnight. One of my supervising internal medicine residents even asked me what I did with the other guy. Was he locked in a closet, gagged and tied up, or what happened to him? And this renewed attitude has actually carried me throughout my career. I was constantly telling younger physicians, nurses, and technologists this very story, that we succeed when we put the patient's needs as an absolute paramount priority above our own, and no amount of time or effort is too much for them. I do have my sister to thank for that, although I would never tell her that, and I hope she never watches this tape. So, another way that I demonstrate my value for human life is through the alleviation of anxiety. Having grown up here, patients contact me about themselves or their loved ones' illnesses, and they're very worried. When I came back to practice in my hometown in the early 1990s, I was concerned that people would remember me as a silly child and not actually take me seriously. Even Jesus said you can never be a hero in your hometown. So I was pleasantly surprised to learn that I had the opposite reaction, that many of these people I had previously known as friends, and I had an extended family in the area. They developed worrisome health problems and would call me to discuss their situation. They know I cared and I could be trusted, and I would always find an answer to the best way to treat their problem. This is still something that happens on a regular basis, and I do feel privileged to be able to be, for their willingness to share that part of their life with me. As a radiologist, I typically did not participate in direct patient care like a family doctor or an internist. I predominantly read x-rays, CT, MRI, and other advanced imaging studies, and performed procedures like CT-guided biopsy of tumors or embolizing arteries that were bleeding in the fluoroscopy unit. Although I seldom saw patients face to face, I never forgot that the images that I was viewing were merely pictorial representations of a human being. So it was as if they were actually standing there, with me as I was reading this, and they were depending upon my skills and my experience and my time to solve these problems and diagnose their disease that might perhaps be life-saving or ameliorate their pain and suffering. One of my University of Washington professor was Dr. Paul Beeson, who is the editor of Cecil's internal medicine textbook. That is one of 2 of the premier internal medicine textbooks utilized in the world today. He has a quote in the textbook that I love. It said, "He loves humanity and he hates inhumanity." And this statement has stuck with me. And in many ways, it sums up my vocational attitude in these short stories. So I dearly cherish the sanctity of human life, and is above all else what I value most, and hopefully it's been demonstrated throughout my career. Thank you.
We wanted to do a land acknowledgement. I've done this many times. I've worked at many universities and done a lot of different events. So I was thinking it's important that institutions such as Boise State, Lewis Clark, et cetera, acknowledge the lands that you all live on. We have been here a long time, long time, since time immemorial. And so we want to do that. I'm going to read just a little bit. I want to have a good hello to you all. And again, I said Tatsalach, that was good afternoon in my language, and Nimi Butimpt. So, again, my name is Phil Allen, and I would like to offer all our participants and visitors a very big welcome. Because you are in the lands of the Nimi Pu, the real people, the first people of this land where we're all sitting. And this place is actually called Saminakam in our language. So all you that live here in Lewiston, you should know that word, Saminakam. That's where the two rivers meet, right over here where we're at. We have names for all of these different places. So that can tell you how long we've been here. So just again, for all of you local people that live here, Saminakam. So if you hear that word, you know we're talking about Lewiston and Clarkston. Our people are known for hospitality. You know, since the historical meeting of Lewis and Clark, when they met up there up at Weipe, or how we say Weipe in our language. And just so you know, I did my master's program on Lewis and Clark in a Nez Perce. So I know a lot about Lewis and Clark. And eventually I would teach at Lewis Clark State College as well. So we'd like to welcome all of you. Again, those of you that have been here all your lives, and we welcome you, and we want to have good neighbors, and we want to have good feelings between the Nez Perce people and our neighbors. So again, as the original peoples of this land, I want to again just appreciate the things that education has done for many of us. So that's all I have to say. I'd say it as Yokskalo. That means I am done, that I'm finished in my language. We like to throw some of our Nimi Pu language. And LCSE actually teaches Nez Perce language as a foreign language, which is kind of funny to me, but that's how it is. Okay. Hey, as a tribal member and an educator, my values revolve around cultural education and knowledge. My reasoning is that education can help people understand other ways of knowing and to look at how other people think. The value of education has always been something my dad, Philip Sr., deemed necessary as we as tribal people go into the real world. He explained to me my education would open doors for me in my professional life. And he was correct. My dad was a World War II veteran with a 9th grade education, but in the Army, he learned to speak German in a very short time. The reason why he learned German was he was going to become a prison guard in Germany while he was stationed there. He was the one that took the last man in his last walk, he would take them to be hung. So my dad had to endure, being in the Army, and I'm also an Army veteran myself. So he was trilingual, and so cultural education and knowledge was what he was experiencing before we even had names for stuff like that. So these values were pushed onto me, and I've always done well in school, so the expectation was to go to college. There was no and, if, or but. I'm a first-generation college student. Both my parents never finished high school, but that was very typical of that generation coming out of World War II. So it wasn't just a racial thing. It was everybody that came out of World War II that you got married, and then you started work. Although I experienced some of the pitfalls of incoming freshmen to the University of Idaho back in 1983, which seems like a long time ago to me now, when people remind me when I graduated from high school in Lapwai. But it took me 10 years to finally finish my bachelor's degree in history and public law, because I stopped in, I stopped out. I did a lot of things a lot of young people do. You don't know what you're going to do. And no one told me that my degree in history, a bachelor's, and what you're going to do with it. I ended up working for the Nez Perce tribe with the casino. When we first opened the casino, I was there when we opened the doors at our casino with my bachelor's degree in history and political science. And then, after the politics of working there, I ended up working at Walmart over in Lewiston up here on the hill. I used to be there. I worked there. And what do I do with my degree? A history degree. And then the next step I took was I worked with fisheries. And my brother's sitting over here who got me connected to fisheries. He taught me a lot. My brother taught me a lot. Get emotional because a lot of the stuff that we've done together growing up, because we lost our mother on March 9th, 1974. He was 5, my little sister's 7, I was 9. So I like to talk about those kind of things in terms of how education will affect you as a person, as a professional, and myself as a cultural, as a tribal person. So I eventually became a college teacher, almost by mistake. So I started working at University of Idaho during the summers with the TRIO programs in Upward Bound. And actually, my brother and my little sister and I, we were all former Upward Bound students. So I don't know if you guys remember Isabel Bond. She was one of my mentors. She passed a few years ago. And she was the one that kind of pushed me into being in education. She was one of those kind of people that made me feel that I could do anything. So I always talk about her. When I was in my doctoral program at Washington State, they asked me, well, who was the most influential people in your life? And it's interesting, Dean Thomas, the former president of LCSC, was actually my advisor at University of Idaho and had brought me down to LCSC back in 2002 or 2003. So I taught at LCSC for 4 years, 5 years actually. So having Isabel Bond and even Kathy Aiken and Dean Thomas as some of my mentors, and the funny thing is that they were white women. Myself as a tribal person, you think about, racism, you think about stereotypes and all those kind of things. But I took it as a good sign because my father really liked Isabel, Kathy Aiken. I can name a lot of people who were influential in my life. And regardless of the race, I still take that into effect that who shaped me who I am today. So I would end up teaching for North Idaho College for 5 years. At the same time, I got hired at Lewis Clark State College. At the same time, I got connected with Northwest Indian College. So I technically was teaching for 3 colleges for almost 2 years. And it's just crazy to think that my love for education, because I taught 7 classes at Northwest Indian College, I taught 3 classes at Lewis Clark State College, I taught 3 classes at North Idaho College. Remember, they were both in different quarters and semesters, so I took it on and I loved it so much. That's why education's important to me. My dad used to tell me with a work ethic, take a job, get it, and fake it till you know it. Because when they hired me, I had really no teaching experience. It was just at that time they needed people with Native background, with Native education to come in and teach. So another part of my education was that I created or taught over 30-some classes. So I have a nice curriculum vitae. That's interesting that Dean Thomas brought me down. I didn't have to interview. University of Idaho, I didn't have to interview. Northwest Indian College, I didn't have an interview. So I was really fortunate to be in a position where I could do things that a lot of people don't get a chance to do. So another example of this value in my education was performing down in Nampa this past weekend. And it was an Explore Dance presentation for the Kessler Keener Foundation as a fundraiser. And what it was, again, where there was 10 different acts, 10 different groups dancing and showcasing their dance styles. And when I first got there, and I almost forgot about this event and that event, because I do a lot of different things. And, as the older I get, it seems I'm more busy than I ever was. And I get there, and I'm not sure how to act. I mean, I've been in this position before, just like right here where I'm standing and looking out to the audience. I was the only male dancer. So I didn't really know any of these people or anything. I mean, I knew a couple of them through Kessler Keener. And then what happened was, since I'm the only male, I got my own dressing room, so I felt like a rock star. I was like, wow, I had my name. I put it on my Facebook too, and everybody's laughing because they're like, oh wow, you got your own room and everything. Well, it's because everybody else was female, so that's why I got my own room. But still, the fact of the matter was, here I am dressed up in my grass outfit. I dance grass. I don't know if you guys know much about powwows, but you should. LCSC has a powwow every year, University of Idaho, Washington State. Powwow season's going on right now. But so again, the idea of why I did it, and because you get put into these kind of positions, I'm sure my fellow speakers are kind of feeling that as well, not knowing all of you, even though we brought our own tables of people that we are familiar with. But it was tough at first. But I've been doing this for such a long time. I thought, well, I'm going to go in, give it my best go, and I'm going to dance, and I'm going to show them, what I do every weekend. I'm actually going to University of Montana this weekend to dance at their big powwow, Kiayo. So with that, excuse me, I almost lost my place. So as a male dancer, so I went out and I was telling my family, I was telling my powwow friends on my Facebook, I said, guess what? There's like some nice fancy stage. They got we had what do you call it? The illumination with a little X. That's where you start because it's all dark. And I was kind of, wow, okay. Anyway, so of course, I was dressed in my outfit, got dressed, and I was standing on the sides watching the first two acts. Then they showed a little video of what Kessler Keener's been doing with the Native Voices Project, which I helped them with, the first series. You guys can go look at it. It's called nativevoices.org. You can look it up. That's something I've done out of Boise. Okay, so what had happened was I didn't get to practice. I didn't get to warm up. And I don't know if you guys seen powwow people. Our outfits are very heavy. And so I am out there. I saw the X. The lights go out. Phil, you're next. So I go standing out there. Felt like Michael Jackson. I put my arms across like this, and I'm dancing. I'm not dancing. Lights are off. Boom, lights go on. I can't see anybody in the audience. So it comes on, and the song starts. And I just started dancing. And it was just kind of cool because I was thinking, wow, I've danced in front of thousands and thousands of people, but I was kind of nervous because I couldn't see the audience. And it's tough when you're by yourself, right? I didn't have anybody dancing with me or anything, so you just concentrate on the song. And it was a song that from a drum group. I picked them because one of my nephews had passed away. His name was Andrew Broncho. He had passed away, and he used to sing with this drum group. He passed away from COVID. So I got emotional. I was dancing hard, and I thought I just blocked everybody out, and I just did my dance, and I knew it was coming to the end. I wanted to make sure I stopped on time to make it look good. So once it got finished, and I stopped, and it just went crazy. It's people. I literally felt. Seriously, guys, I felt like a rock star. But the whole thing about them. So once we got done with the first group, which was children, preschool or grade school, I went into the room, and they had Panera. You guys are familiar with Panera. They had some really good food for us. So I kind of walked in this room with all these non-native, all these white young ladies, and I kind of walked in. I wasn't in my outfit. I was dressed, shorts and sweatshirt. And one of the ladies said, "Phil, your food's right here." And yeah, so anyway, that was it. So that was kind of my last experience. So once I got done with vening with those guys, I thought I did my job, and that's where I stopped, and I smiled, and I said, "Thank you."
My time is what I value most. At 10 years old, time well spent meant racing around the neighborhood on foot, feeling the wind in my face and how my feet, arms, and legs moved so fast and effortlessly over the neighborhood sidewalks, lawns, and curbs. A year later, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, an extremely rare diagnosis at 11 years old. After breaking the record for the longest pediatric surgery at St. Luke's Hospital in Boise, I started a regimen of chemo. In a matter of months, I went from 89 to 54 pounds. I lost every hair on my body, and my room at the top of the stairs had just become too far to walk. For months, my time was spent quietly. Eyes closed, choking back the nausea. Though not comfortable, this time was well spent. I got to know myself, my inner voice, and I learned to carefully control my inner dialogue. I learned to be kind and purposeful with my thoughts about myself and the world around me, and in doing so, I found peace and comfort. After a few months of therapy, I remember one day so vividly. I was sitting in my hospital bed, and I was feeling okay for once. And I watched people 4 stories down, outside on a summer's day, riding their bikes and running in the sunshine. It was in that quiet moment that I realized how much my body and my reality had changed. And I remember feeling complete acceptance and peace with my circumstances. I sat and I enjoyed watching the people play outside. I remember wondering if I would do those things again, but I wasn't angry or frustrated. It was that moment that I began to realize how precious our time is. And I sat back and I fully enjoyed the sunshine coming in on my face in the company of my family. And I felt peace, curiosity, and wonderment about the road ahead. The lesson learned by my 11-year-old self, our internal dialogue, the way we think about ourselves, and the world around us, it influences the decisions we make from minute to minute. And ultimately, how we spend our time. How much time we get is unknown. So be present and live it with purpose. The road to recovery tested the strength in my internal dialogue and my commitment to being present and purposeful with my time. I returned to 6th grade, and I was changed in every way from the child that had left in 5th grade. Soon, grabbing my hat and throwing it over the schoolyard fence was a favorite daily game for a group of children at recess. I usually took it off and just gave it to them because really being seen as bald was less concerning to me than getting hurt in a tussle over my hat. The posse grew in size, and the group of onlookers became more engaged. One day, as they ran for me and my hat, in the corner of the schoolyard. I jumped up on an electrical box. I took off my hat and I screamed at the kids gathered there that I had had cancer and that I had been so sick that my hair had fallen out and that they probably had grandparents with this disease. And to pick on me was cruel. The curious kids were no longer curious. Those that feared me were no longer scared. And the mean kids, well, they were still mean. But probably because they were hurting. And they continued to steal my hat, but they no longer had an audience. My sense of urgency to protect my time drove me up on that box that day. And my kind and positive internal dialogue empowered me to find the words to defend myself. I decided to run cross country in junior high after all of that. I was the slowest runner in the entire district. The finish line was picked up, spectators had dispersed, and the buses were about to leave by the time I reached the end of my first race. The organizers eventually learned that I was going to get there and I wasn't giving up, and they started staying long enough for me to have a finish line to cross. I had hair again, and my cancer history actually had remained somewhat unknown in this new school. It never crossed my mind to give a possible explanation for why I was so slow. I remember reading the bewilderment on spectators' faces at how far behind the others I was. But I was just happy to be running, and I could clearly see that I was becoming stronger and faster every single week. The school awarded me the most improved player that first year. I probably shaved an hour off my time. Nobody came close to that. My coach eventually learned of my medical history, and he was upset that I had never mentioned it to him. I told him that I hadn't said anything because I thought he would treat me different than the other kids if I had. But truthfully, it just hadn't occurred to me to share my history. I was there getting stronger just like everyone else, and I was doing really great at that. By my senior year in high school, I was actually quite strong, healthy, and I was the fastest runner on our varsity team. I'm now 45 years old with a daughter, a husband, and a business. Nowadays, being present and purposeful with my time generally manifests as beautiful little moments that happen many times a day. Reading books with inflection in my voice and taking pauses to soak in Stella's eager gaze as she looks at me. Making eye contact with a stranger and giving them a smile. Saying anything. It's saying no to opportunities when I might prefer to spend my time elsewhere. Being careful to spend my time with people that fill my cup rather than spill it. Respecting the value and valuing the time that others choose to spend with me, like hiring employees. I am purchasing their time. This is a gift not lost on me. Doing something that bucks the norm and being at peace knowing that it feels right to me. Like starting a winery in Lewiston, Idaho 22 years ago. As popular as wine may have become, I'm still the only wine-stained mama in the pre-K parking lot at the pickup line. If you live long enough, you will lose people you love. Each day that we get to walk with those we love is a gift. I love fiercely, and I'm tremendously grateful that we've walked together for any distance. I want to reach back in time and hug that wise little girl as she crossed the finish line at that first race and thank her for learning how to truly value time. Because our internal dialogue, the way we talk to ourselves and the world around us, it influences the decisions we make from minute to minute, and ultimately how we spend our time. How much we get beyond this moment is unknown. Be present and live it with purpose.
I can remember sitting in my first grade classroom, the smell of crayons and school supplies filling the air. I was surrounded by about 20 students, all different from myself, and learned the word empathy for the first time. My teacher showed us a picture of 4 shoes, red, yellow, green, and blue, and said that empathy was like walking in someone else's shoes. Before getting upset by someone's emotions, it's important to see the world from their perspective and understand why they're feeling that way. As I stand before you all today, I can look out and I see many faces, each carrying their own story. You have your own struggles and your own successes, and each with your own viewpoint. But that's the beautiful thing about being a human. We are all small fragments of one big mosaic. Each of us contributes a small piece to a larger story. The earliest time I can remember feeling empathy, I was about 7 years old, and I was at a roller rink for a birthday party. At this party, there was a kid about 5 years old with red hair, a snotty nose, and chapped lips. He was friendly and kept coming up to talk and play with my group, but the other members of my group weren't so accepting. They were making fun of him and laughing, but the red-headed kid didn't seem to notice. After leaving the party, I could not understand why I felt so bad. I thought it was guilt for not speaking up, and maybe that's true too, but I understand now that what I was really feeling was empathy. I was imagining myself as that young, red-headed boy and how horrible it would feel to be bullied. Throughout my life, I have often, and sometimes continue to, confuse empathy with guilt. As I got older, I learned how to harness my empathy to make positive change. When I got to 8th grade, I stood up in front of my peers and said that I was the class president that was going to make a difference because I was going to talk to the principal and tell him to unban hats in schools. Now, I did not often wear hats, but I could understand why my classmates were frustrated with the hat ban. From their perspective, it was pointless and only served to limit their fashion choices. The principal said he would consider it only on days when we achieved more than 90% attendance. This was a victory because he showed empathy towards his students. When I got to high school, I started working at a local nursing home as a CNA. I struggled with this job because I always found myself feeling bad that I couldn't spend as much time with the residents as they deserved. When I moved to college, I decided to continue my work as a CNA to help me pay tuition. Recently, I had a patient whose wife passed away, and he was living in his car. He came to me barely conscious and unable to recount how he arrived at the hospital. Yet, he was so kind and always apologized for his poor memory. As I carried out my rotation, I watched his condition improve, and with that, I watched him become even more kind. He always thanked me for bringing him water. He was never upset when it took me 5 minutes to grab him what he needed. He was so positive about his situation, and he always told me how great of a person I was. The last night of my rotation, I went home and cried. I had so much empathy for this man who was faced with so many challenges, yet chose to be kind throughout it all. Sometimes empathy can hurt. In my second year of college, I was ready to make a difference, and I believed that I knew what to do. I'd spent my first year observing and listening to others, so I felt like I had a grasp on the average LC State student experience. I had found that many students, myself included, faced financial struggles while trying to attend college. So, when the council was presented with several organizations proposing to increase student fees, my first instinct was to cut them all down to keep costs as low as possible for students. However, when the organizations presented their reasoning, I came to realize that they too needed money to continue functioning. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. I had empathy for the students who I knew would not appreciate an increase to their student fees, but I also had empathy for organizations who needed money to function properly. With the council, we worked through this issue and came to a solution that I believe was fair. We decided to go half and half. When we awarded organizations an extra $1, we looked for places to save students $1. After college, I'd like to enter the workforce as a teacher. Some children come from privilege, and some come from poverty, each having their own struggles. No matter the child's background, I want to understand them and use their perspectives to guide their education. I want to be an educator that teaches students empathy and raises our future generations to be understanding. So much that I have told you so far has been about school or about work, but empathy shapes how I see the world too. The drive to understand perspectives of others has led me to be deeply saddened by recent events. As I was scrolling through social media, I saw a post starting with, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." And several minutes later, someone showed me a video containing fighter jets and told me how cool it was. This hurts my heart. The people on the receiving end of this violence are also pieces in humanity's mosaic. I empathize with the mothers that are losing their children and the children that are being separated from their families. I will never fully understand their pain, but I'm able to walk in their shoes and see how they might be feeling. This also goes for the Americans whose sons, daughters, husbands, and wives may be sent off to fight. I empathize with the feelings of being separated from loved ones. My desire to speak on this situation is driven by emotion rather than politically motivated. I understand that conflict is inevitable and sometimes necessary. I do not bring up this point to cause division, but rather to display how I perceive the world. No matter what color your shoes are, you deserve to be heard and understood. I will walk a mile in your shoes simply to see where you get blisters. As humans, we should all have empathy for each other. Varying perspectives are important and are what make our mosaic so beautiful. Our differences don't divide us, rather, they unite us. So thank you for taking this time to suspend your own opinions and see the world through the lens of another.
I have two identities, and these identities are at war. I know this is Idaho Listens, but I got the permission to involve you, so please indulge me. On cue, I will ask for your response, and the answer will be human being. I am a That's our common denominator. That is the basis of compassion, of camaraderie, of mutual respect, of empathy. That is our common ground. I am a not a human doing. My value is based not on what I do, but on who I am. Resolutions are based on what I do, but I'm choosing to base a different resolution on who I am. I am that's physical. That's my temporal identity. I have no choice in my physical reality. I did not choose where I was born. I do not choose in which shoes I walk life. I had no choice in that. That is what embraces my origins, my culture, my living, my reality. And we all share this first identity. I'd like to speak to another and second identity, from where I will speak to the value tonight. Let me tell you about it. Growing up, we sang a song in my home, I am a C. I am a CH. I am a CHRISTIAN, and I have CHRIST in my HEART. How many of you know this song? I am a Christian. Speaking to my spiritual identity, I am a Christian. I am curious, as my natural disposition, and every single one of us has a spiritual identity as well. And I will respect your spiritual identity no matter what that spiritual identity is. I value freedom of choice, freedom to choose what your spiritual identity is. You had no choice in your physical, but you have a choice in your spiritual. I choose to be like Jesus. And yet I reject a specific kind of Jesus. I choose to be like Jesus, not the co-opted Jesus, not the political Jesus, not the social club Jesus, not the agenda-driven and laden Jesus, but the meek and the mild, the humble and the kind, the historical, the raw, the true-to-character kind of Jesus. And it's messy. It's hard. It is not easy. It is sometimes exhausting, most times exhilarating. Let me tell you about it. And the value of consistency brings cohesion between my two identities. Spiritual enlightenment is meant to illuminate physical action. And when these two do not line up in that order, there is chaos and confusion. Journey with me back to 1978, April, I believe, 26. In the highlands of Kenya, it was a Sunday afternoon where my parents got married. And the silent part was being spoken out loud, or maybe in secret, or maybe behind people's backs. They decided, my parents did, well, let's put it this way, they decided to get married out of love. The problem was, they are from two different tribes, warring tribes. Tribalism is a real thing. And yet, during this event, my grandfather understood the cultural tendency and the tribalism and spoke to that and said, as a Christian, If you are a Christian, you need to put away your tribalism and make the couple, my parents, feel welcome and embraced cross-tribally. At that moment, my grandfather chose consistency over culture, chose to have his spiritual identity inform his cultural reality. Fast forward to 1994, April 7 through July 19. I was 9 years old, and I remember hearing the news, 100 days, April 7 through July 19, 1 million Rwandese were killed. The Rwandan genocide had an effect on the world's psyche, on humanity, on the fabric of humanity. The mosaic was torn and is torn during any kind of war and these kind of effects. I remember receiving, or can I say seeing, a good number of Rwandese refugees, young boys, young girls, mothers, fathers who had been displaced because of political ideology and cultural identity. The Hutus against the Tutsis. Tribalism. Christian Hutus killing Christian Tutsis. That's a conundrum. Their culture was informing, what can I say, superseding their Christian identity. They chose culture over Christ. And this is not a unique event. This event has played out throughout history multiple times. We can think of Hitler's Germany, where it was Christians who voted in 1939, and we know the rest of the story. Replacement theory, Aryanism, survival for the fittest, choosing culture over Christ. My third reality is, I could speak to many things, but I want to speak to my career. I've done many things in my life. I have been and had the privilege of mentoring young people for 14 years in a small Bible college, and one of the qualities that young people look for in individuals who call themselves leaders is coherence and cohesion, consistency between what they say and what they do. There's something about idealism, the idealism of youth that sniffs out hypocrisy. I have 3 children, my wife and I, that is, 5 years old, 3 years old, and 1 year old, all of them turning to the next age this year. And every single time I do something that I have not asked them to do, you should not do this, and I do that, they say, Daddy, you're not being kind, or you're not doing what you tell us to do at 5 years old. And I chuckle and I say, you know what, you're right, I am sorry. Consistency is what idealism calls for. I remember sitting in class at a Bible college, and the discussion came up, why is it that young people leave the church? Why is it that people reject religion? Why is it that the Western culture as a whole has turned its back on Christianity? And the resounding answer is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. The people who claim the high road choose culture, convenience over the calling that they so readily embrace. Speaking to my calling or career, in the many years that I worked with the young people, that was the lesson that I learned. They are looking for consistency. A few years ago, after purchasing the business, I quickly realized that my calling, my choice, my spiritual identity can run across the grain and can be challenged in business decisions. This is a business. You're supposed to do and serve everyone no matter the cost. This is not an easy decision. We understand and we know that some of the decisions have made their way all the way to the Supreme Court. And so stepping into a service-based industry and business, I had to face that reality and ask myself, am I willing to choose the coin over Christ, or Christ over the coin, over profits, over the reality of providing financially? It is not an easy calling when your paycheck is on the line, but my desire is to be consistent, no matter the cost. I have two identities, and these identities can be at war. But I choose consistency over convenience, cohesion over chaos, Christ over culture, Christ over the coin. I choose the value of consistency.
Can our first set of speakers please join us up front? Please join me in thanking our speakers this evening.